You say prosecutors have told you, quote, if we wanted to indict Mr. Kerik, we would have already done so. And your client's one of 30 unindicted co-conspirators in your case. Did he witness any criminality? Does he have testimony that is worth his testimony?
Well, from my understanding, he does not have anything that would indicate criminality by the president, by Rudy Giuliani, or any member of the Giuliani team. Would he potentially be helpful in a case against Sydney Powell? I think he would. And I think that that's kind of a wrinkle to this case that's difficult on a whole bunch of different levels. So I could see why they would want him to testify relevant to Sydney Powell. But if you're not willing to give him the basic protections that any normal prosecutor in any other prosecuting office in the country would do, then you're just not going to be able to force him to testify.
Is Sydney Powell the only one that he might have evidence against or testimony against? Are there other individuals that he might have witnessed something that is worth discussing?
In this group, it is primarily Sydney Powell because, you know, the testimony that he has is that Rudy Giuliani and his whole team, they were pursuing leads. They were hampered by a lack of time, a lack of resources, and so that prevented them from being able to chase everything down completely. It certainly did lead to certain inaccuracies. But when they talk about people putting out knowingly false claims, Kerik and others are going to be able to point right over at Sydney Powell and say, hey, what they're accusing us of, she did.
This is Michael Popok, Legal AF. That was Tim Parlatore, formerly Donald Trump's lawyer from Mar-a-Lago, now representing Bernie Kerik, the disgraced former police chief for New York who got pardoned by Donald Trump, became a bagman carrying around the investigations for Rudy Giuliani and who worked closely for Sydney Powell. He has been subpoenaed by Fani Willis, Fulton County District Attorney, to appear at the Ken Chesborough and Sydney Powell trial that starts on the 23rd of October. 2 of the remaining 18 co-conspirators are being tried under the Speedy Trial Act by her as a dress rehearsal for her trial of Donald Trump that'll happen in 2024. Why this new news is important, as reported by CNN, is that we've got Tim Parlatore hanging out a incentive for Fani Willis to subpoena and give immunity to his client because that client is going to dump on Sydney Powell. Now, Tim Parlatore and his client are going to try to thread a very delicate needle and drag a camel through the eye of it. Because as you can hear from that CNN reporting, he says he's going to basically validate things that Rudy Giuliani did, who's also been indicted for 13 counts of criminal, as part of a criminal conspiracy in Georgia. And he's going to try to absolve Donald Trump from having any knowledge. But he will, as Tim Parlatore just said, dump all over Sydney Powell, the lawyer who was fired ultimately by the Trump campaign, but very late in the game after she went around promoting on behalf of Donald Trump fraudulent voting, false voting, software fraud with Dominion voting machines in various locations and the like. And she was co-captain of Team Crazy along with Rudy Giuliani and helping to file 60 losing cases claiming some sort of election fraud or interference. But this presents a difficult decision, a dilemma for the prosecutor, because this is not a clean witness who is just going to dump on Sydney Powell while at the same time saying that Donald Trump didn't know anything about it, if his lawyer is to be believed, and try to absolve Rudy Giuliani. Now, neither of those are on trial. Neither of those people are on trial. But that doesn't mean that Bernie Kerik, if put on the stand with full immunity from Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis, because he is one of the 30 unindicted co-conspirators that were listed in her indictment, even though he hasn't been indicted. And apparently the Fulton County DA's office has told the counsel for him, Mr. Parlatore, they have no intention of indicting him. But he'll take the Fifth Amendment, obviously, unless he's given full immunity. But again, as I said, he presents a dangerous conundrum for Fani Willis. He will hurt and damage Sydney Powell, as we just heard from his counsel. He will, however, in the same breath, try to absolve and defend Rudy Giuliani, who was his best friend for years, and also Donald Trump. But again, the case isn't against Donald Trump in October. It is indirectly. It is in terms of presentation to the jury. But the jury's not going to have to decide on their jury verdict form, did Donald Trump direct Bernie Kerik, Sydney Powell, Ken Chesborough, the other constitutional law professor, constitutional lawyer that Donald Trump relied on. That's not going to be the issue at the trial. So it's something that Fani Willis is going to have to consider. To remind everyone, let me remind people who Sydney Powell is. Sometimes people forget. I've even had people tell me in the chat, I thought she was a man. Well, she wasn't. And she was pushing conspiracy theories involving Dominion voting software, Dominion voting system machines, and Smartmatic software from almost the very beginning. And it's those types of lies that ended up, of course, being used by Donald Trump and people like Rudy Giuliani around the country, including Rudy Giuliani attacking Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman based on information that he obtained from Sydney Powell, claiming that they had inserted a thumb drive downloading Biden invalid votes, fake votes, to overturn the will of the people in Georgia, which of course is a lie. Let me show you a clip of Sydney Powell, her talking with Rudy Giuliani by her side at a podium. And before I play that clip, there was, as the Jan 6 committee, and a clip I'm going to show you after that, properly noted, Donald Trump, along with Rudy Giuliani and Sydney Powell, drafted but did not sign an executive order that the president was going to sign as part of this coup conspiracy in which voting machines were going to be seized. And Sydney Powell, this person you're going to see a clip from next, was going to be appointed a special counsel, just like Jack Smith is now, to seize voting machines and run that election. Let's run the clip first of Sydney Powell at the podium with Rudy Giuliani. You'll get a little flavor of why she was indicted 13 times in Georgia as she goes to trial in just a couple of weeks. Let's roll.
Talking about some massive straight lines up in the vote tallies in the middle of the night after they've supposedly stopped counting. And that's when the Dominion operators went in and injected votes and changed the whole system. And it affects votes around the country, around the world, and all kinds of massive interests of globalists, dictators, corporations, you name it. Everybody's against us except President Trump and we the people of the United States of America.
Okay, that was Sydney Powell. I could show you 10 more or 50 more clips of her, but they're all about the same. You get the flavor, you get the gist. She was, again, co-captain of Team Crazy, as Eric Hirschman, a deputy White House counsel, and others called her. But she had the ear of President Trump for a long, long time, all the way through December, late December, before he had to get out of office and finally turn over the reins of power under force to Joe Biden come the inaugural. So the fact that Donald Trump, quote unquote, fired Sydney Powell at some time with a press release was so late in the game after the conspiracy had already been running for several months. I don't think that did anybody any favors and certainly didn't absolve anybody of any criminal liability. The Jan 6 committee was very, very interested in both Bernie Kerik and Sydney Powell and the rest. And now I'm going to play you a clip from Jamie Raskin, one of the managers for the House Jan 6 committee, playing clips from Pat Cipollone, Donald Trump's then White House counsel, the lead lawyer for Donald Trump in the White House. Also Bill Barr, the former attorney general, about the fraud in the election claims, and Sydney Powell, and then their views of who Sydney Powell was and whether she was even qualified to be a special counsel. Let's hear from these gentlemen next, being shown clips from the Jan 6 committee led by Jamie Raskin. Let's roll the clip.
As you'll see in this clip, the president asked Attorney General Bill Barr to have the Department of Justice seize voting machines in the states.
My recollection is the president said something like, well, we could get to the bottom. Some people say we could get to the bottom of this if the department seized the machines. It was a typical way of raising a point. And I said, absolutely not. There's no probable cause, and I'm not going to seize any machines. And that was that. Yeah.
But this wasn't the end of the matter. On the evening of December 18th, 2020, Sydney Powell, General Michael Flynn, and others entered the White House for an unplanned meeting with the president, the meeting that would last multiple hours and become hot-blooded and contentious. The executive order behind me on the screen was drafted on December the 16th, just 2 days after the Electoral College vote, by several of the president's outside advisors over a luncheon at the Trump International Hotel. As you can see here, this proposed order directs the Secretary of Defense to seize voting machines, quote, effective immediately, but it goes even further than that. Under the order, President Trump would appoint a special counsel with the power to seize machines and then charge people with crimes with all resources necessary to carry out her duties. The specific plan was to name Sydney Powell as special counsel, the Trump lawyer who had spent the post-election period making outlandish claims about Venezuelan and Chinese interference in the election, among others. Here's what White House counsel Pat Cipollone had to say about Sydney Powell's qualifications to take on such expansive authority.
I don't think Sydney Powell would say that I thought it was a good idea to appoint her special counsel. I was vehemently opposed. I didn't think she should be appointed to anything.
Sydney Powell told the president that these steps were justified because of her evidence of foreign interference in the 2020 election. However, as we've seen, Trump's allies had no such evidence and, of course, no legal authority for the federal government to seize state voting machines. Here's Mr. Cipollone again denouncing Sydney Powell's terrible idea.
There was a real question in my mind and a real concern, particularly after the Attorney General had reached a conclusion that there wasn't sufficient election fraud to change the outcome of the election. When other people kept suggesting that there was, the answer is, what is it? And at some point, you have to put up or shut up. That was my view.
Why was this, on a broader scale, a bad idea for the country?
To have the federal government seize voting machines, that's a terrible idea for the country. That's not how we do things in the United States. There's no legal authority to do that. And there is a way to contest elections, that happens all the time. But the idea that the federal government could come in and seize election machines, I don't understand why I would even have to tell you why that's a bad idea for the country. It's a terrible idea.
For all of its absurdity, the December 18th meeting was critically important because President Trump got to watch up close for several hours as his White House counsel and other White House lawyers destroyed the baseless factual claims and ridiculous legal arguments being offered by Sydney Powell, Mike Flynn, and others. President Trump now knew all these claims were nonsense, not just from his able White House lawyers, but also from his own Department of Justice officials and indeed his own campaign officials. As White House counsel Pat Cipollone told us,
with respect to the whole election fraud issue, to me, it's sort of, if you're going to make those kind of claims, and people were open to them early on because people were making all sorts of claims, and the real question is, show the evidence, okay?
It wasn't just the Justice Department, the Trump campaign, and the Trump White House lawyers who knew it. Even Rudy Giuliani's own legal team admitted that they did not have any real evidence of fraud sufficient to change the election result. Here's an email from Rudy Giuliani's lead investigator, Bernie Kerik, on December 28, 2020, to Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Mr. Kerik did not mince any words. We can do all the investigations we want later, but if the president plans on winning, it's the legislators that have to be moved, and this will do just that. Mr. Kerik wanted the president to win. What he didn't say in this email was what he would later tell the Select Committee in a letter that his lawyer wrote to us in November. The letter said, quote, "It was impossible for Mr. Kerik and his team to determine conclusively whether there was widespread fraud or whether that widespread fraud would have altered the outcome of the election." In other words, even Rudy Giuliani's own legal team knew before January 6th that they hadn't collected enough actual evidence to support any of their stolen election claims.
Now, if you put all these things together, 3 clips that I played, and it's the purpose of this particular hot take here, is the decision-making that somebody like Fani Willis has to make every minute of every day about strategy and tactics in her trial. I've been a trial lawyer for 32 years in courtrooms just like the ones I'm reporting on. And these decisions are hard to make. How do you build your case? How do you properly present your case to a jury? How do you build momentum, witness to witness and document to document? It's important. If you do it out of order, wrong witness in the wrong order, the jury can get confused or not follow the narrative that you're trying to make in order to prosecute the case. And if you do a document out of order, if you bore the jury to tears too early and numb their mind and turn them off to evidence, then you're making a mistake. But what you're watching, I think, with the way that Fani Willis is arranging her witnesses, just like we're watching Letitia James in the New York Attorney General trial, it's going on into its 2nd week right now. What we're watching is their understanding as prosecutors and attorneys general, that juries make up their mind very quickly. Jury science tells us that juries make up their mind like in the first week of a trial. Even if the trial goes on for months, they've made up their mind. They're just waiting for the lawyers to stop talking so they can render their verdict. Trial lawyers don't like to think that that's true, but jury science and discussions with juries and scholarship around juries tells us that it is. They listen to the opening statements, they listen to the 1 or 2 first witnesses, and then they get a handle on where they're really going to end up. And while something could happen, that's some sort of bombshell event, some moment in the trial that could turn fate one way or the other, that's unusual, especially when you have good lawyering, at least on one side here. So the question now for Fani Willis, which is at the heart of this hot take I'm doing, is does she give immunity to Bernie Kerik? That's sort of a no-brainer, because if she's not planning to indict him, which her lawyers have told his lawyers that they're not, then give him immunity. Now he has to testify truthfully, but it's a double or triple-edged sword with him, because he'll dump on Sydney Powell, one of the 2 co-defendants going to trial in 2 weeks, but he'll try to absolve Rudy Giuliani under sworn testimony and and try to get Trump absolved as well. So they're going to have to give him immunity, then bring him in with Tim Parlatore, do a deep dive debriefing of his testimony and what it would look like and the shape and contour of it. And if they like it and they can limit it and cabin it into something very narrow and specific that helps them for their case, and that they can only get from somebody like Bernie Kerik, they can't get it from a better witness, then they should do it. But if after interviewing him, they think, no, the juice is not worth the squeeze, it's not worth it, he's too dangerous in other parts, then they will cut him loose and not, they've already given him immunity, but they won't put him on the stand. And that's the game that Tim Parlatore, the lawyer on the first clip, is playing. He's trying to both bait the Fulton County DA to give his client immunity, but also signaling to them publicly that the client may not be very good for them on the stand if they're not willing to also take the good with the bad. The good being he'll dump on Sydney Powell. The bad being he's not going to dump on Rudy Giuliani nor on Donald Trump. Now, they might care about that now, and they may make the decision, we'll call him in the case now against Sydney Powell that starts in 2 weeks, but we won't ever use him for Donald Trump or for Giuliani. But Giuliani and Trump, will call him as a witness. And I guess at the very least, they'll get a handle on what his testimony is going to be, because generally in criminal cases, you don't get depositions before trial. You might get a witness statement if there is one, but you don't get what happens in civil cases where a party is deposed, questioned under oath, with a court reporter present as if they're in a courtroom. We call that a deposition. You don't normally get depositions in criminal cases. So the prosecutors nor the defense have a copy of anything of their statements. They have to sort of guess. I've done a fair amount of criminal work in federal court, and you may get, if they were interviewed, this witness by the FBI, you may get the FBI's report and witness statement. But you might just get, okay, after lunch, we're going to call, Jerry Jones. Oh, okay. Well, maybe not that Jerry Jones. They're going to call some witness that you're just getting the name of in the morning for an afternoon examination by the government. And you scramble to try to figure out with your documents and your legal pad how you're going to cross-examine this person. That's our justice system. And that's what Faudy Willis is going to have to very closely examine in her decision-making. And when she does, we'll report it right here on the MeidasTouch Network and also on Legal AF, the leading podcast that sits at that valuable intersection of law, politics, and justice. We do it Wednesdays and Saturdays only on the MeidasTouch Network, on YouTube, and on audio. Subscribe to the MeidasTouch YouTube channel. Help them get to 2 million. The bigger they get, the more your voice is heard. And if you like this hot take by me, Michael Popok, give me a thumbs up and leave me a comment. It helps with my ratings. It helps the continuation of my content coming to you on a regular basis. Until my next hot take, until my next episode of Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting.
Hey Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.